This video is sponsored by Tokyo Treat and Scarecrow. Up first, we have the November box by Tokyo Treat, inspired by autumn on Mount Fuji. Tokyo Treat is a monthly pop snack subscription box where you receive up to 20 limited edition and seasonal snacks in each box. This month's box is inspired by the fall in Mount Fuji, with flavors such as Mount Fuji green tea cake, Mount Fuji sandwich cookies, wasabi flavored potato chips, and much, much more. Up next, we have the November box by Scarecrow. Scarecrow is similar, but these boxes focus more on authentic Japanese flavors. These boxes come with 20 snacks per month, including seasonal teas and tableware. This box is inspired by the wonders of Saitama in the autumn season, featuring various seasonal and regional flavors, each perfectly complemented by the Sayama tea that's included in the box. This Japanese green tea is cultivated in the Saitama region. It is developed to endure even the coldest climates, boasting some of the highest levels of antioxidants found in green tea, making this one both delicious and beneficial. Some of my favorite snacks from both of these boxes had to be the chestnut cakes, the walnut mochi, as well as the Kaburuchu soft candy, which was muscat grape flavor, which I'd never tried before, and the soft, squishy blueberry marshmallows with a bursting center of berry goodness. If either of these boxes tickle your fancy, then click the link in the description below and use my code LucyLove for $5 off your first box. Thank you as ever to Scarecrow and Tokyo Treat for their continued sponsorship of this channel, and let's begin the video. Good evening, and welcome. In today's video, I thought perhaps we could read some of your scary stories that you've kindly sent me by candlelight. So summon your courage, dim the light, and get comfortable. Our first story comes to us from Lunar Shadow. Abrupt, that's how I awoke. The Roman silence, eerie silence. The kind you can hear distant noises in. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and a shiver run down my spine. I turned my head slightly to the right, facing the bedroom door. It was ajar, which distressed me further. I knew I closed it. I always did before I slept. But then I saw it, darkness within the darkness, the shadow within the shadows, a creature of nightmares. He was behind my door, staring at me. I could only see the side of his face at first. Then suddenly he was looming over me. His eyes were the first thing I saw. They were pin-pricked white in colour, and I swore that they glowed. The next thing I noticed was his mouth. It was grinning. A Cheshire Cat grin. I noticed his arms. They were long and bony, with sharp, pointed claws at the tips of each finger. All I could do was stare into his eyes while he stared back, as if looking directly into my very soul. I felt fear I never felt before, and could hear my own heartbeat, like distant drums in my head. I thought I was going to die as I lay drenched in sweat while he just kept staring. It felt like an eternity with us in this stare down, but it could only have been but a few seconds, and yet it was enough for a lifetime. As quickly as it began, it was over, and I was left thinking about it for hours before falling back to sleep from exhaustion. I hope I never go through an experience like that again. And to those reading this, I have a message. Beware what lurks in the shadows. She includes some further details below. This experience occurred about 5 or 6 years ago. In my room, the layout, my bed faces the door, and I always shut it before bed, but that night something felt wrong. I thought that was the only time I saw it, but I was talking to my mother about it and remembered I had an experience with it when I was little as well. I didn't know what it was at the time, as I was only 7 years old when it first happened. It was kind of creepy and sad. I also remembered that I met up with an old friend around the time it happened, and she mentioned that her brother had been playing with a Ouija board with some friends, and things had begun to move around her home. Thank you for sending in this story, Lunar Shadow, and I hope you never have to see that thing again. Our next story comes from Adira, who is very kindly sent 2 separate stories for us to enjoy. I'm sitting in my house as usual, with my husband, just relaxing. We are night owls and gamers, so we used to stay up until 8 in the morning, just playing Apex or Overwatch. I'm sitting there on the couch, and suddenly I hear my dog crying. So my thoughts were, maybe he has to use the bathroom. Mind you, it's 4 a.m. I got up and told my husband to come with me to take him outside, because I was not about to walk out there alone. I get the dog on the leash and walked outside to let him do his thing. He peed, but nothing else. So I told my husband, who was standing by the door, that I was going to let him do the other thing, since we were already out there. Now, I'm going to draw you a diagram for this, because it gets a little confusing just because of the setup of the porch and the house we lived in. As he's using the bathroom, I could tell he was looking toward the back of the house. He was just standing there, looking into the dark. I just thought a bug or something caught his attention. He finishes his business, and I grab a bag so I could throw it away. My husband took the dog so I could put the bag in the bin right beside our house. I walk towards it and I go to lift up the lid. When I look up and see a tall white figure walking horizontally past me, I was in shock. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I dropped the lid and it stopped, turned and looked at me. I ran, like full on bolted into the house. I felt like Usain Bolt put me in the Olympics because I was gone. I had a panic attack while trying to describe what I saw to my husband. I didn't even throw the bag away. That's how in shock I was. It was a 6-foot figure. I couldn't see its face. Honestly, all I saw was the arms and legs moving as it walked past me. I'll include the diagram for your viewing as well. June of 2020. I went to visit my best friend in my hometown in New Jersey for 1 month or so. She lived in a very old building. I believe it was built in the 1950s, but I'm not totally sure. There was 3 floors and she lived on the 3rd one. One day we walked outside to see a parked ambulance with 2 paramedics carrying an old man on a stretcher. I asked my best friend what happened to him, and she said, "Oh, he lives under me. The paramedics always come here to pick him up. He's been living in the building for years. It's just a routine they do for his health," meaning they had to come pick him up for weekly checkups. I thought nothing of it as we sit and watched. My husband, best friend, and I decide to go get something to eat, while in the midst of talking about this ring my mother had bought me from a thrift shop. For some odd reason, I felt like a lot of weird energy was attached to this ring, and I decided to take it off while crossing the street. I'm holding it in my hand as we pass the ambulance. Something came over me, and I sat the ring on the step on the back of the ambulance. And we continued with our day, not thinking about it. Later on, the very same day, we get back to her house, and we see the paramedics talking to one of his relatives, or whoever was taking care of him. Still didn't think much of it, until the next day, when someone in the building told my friend that he had passed. I immediately thought back to the ring, and I was speechless. Did I kill him? I wished I had taken a picture of the ring while I had it, but I didn't have my phone on me, and I was terrified. I was bawling my eyes out. I don't have that ring anymore. I never saw it again after that day. It was a silver ring with 5 elephants on it. My mom got it for me while thrifting somewhere in Ohio. I started getting a weird vibe from it. Weird dreams. Seeing black figures out of the corner of my eyes. Hearing my name being called when no one is around, etc. But when I put it on the ambulance that day, it all stopped. I feel like that's the reason why I'm so careful with what I buy now, especially from thrift shops or crystal shops. Thank you for reading my stories. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Adira, for sending the stories in. I thoroughly enjoyed reading them, and I wish you all the best. Our next story is a fictitious piece of literature written by a very talented subscriber that goes by the pseudonym of Hermes Pluto LoveCraft, and it is titled A Halloween Carol. My name is Peter Gennadius. I swear on the memory of my loved ones that what I recount herein is God's whole, unblemished, honest truth, that it is produced on soiled linens, in a shaky hand, during my indeterminate and possibly permanent stay in Old Haven's asylum, is immaterial. Like that upstart rabble-rouser from across the pond, nigh a century dead, I cannot tell a lie. What I have to tell you, oh dear reader, will upset you. It will upset you situationally, for what occurred to me was horrible, beyond prose's means to convey. It will upset you mentally, for in it you shall see in my station the abject fragility of the human mind. And finally, it will upset you cosmically, for it is my greatest displeasure to inform you that there are ancient, awful gods, as physically large as they are full of malice, who wish for not only the destruction of your body and mind, but of your very soul. And that is only if, from their megalithic view, they register you as a sentient at all. They are just as prone to view you as ants scurrying about their idiotic work. My namesake, Christ's fool, wrote of a devil that was like a hungry lion, seeking out souls to devour. The lion's share of these elder gods are of that ilk, eternally hungry, ever hunting for a precious soul like yours to consume. When the evening that is the focus of my diction occurred, unless you were very young, you were drawing breath into your lungs, as was I. The night in question was not so many revolutions gone from the grotesque murders in Whitechapel, before a long-serving Queen Alexandrina was yet to lay her heavy head upon her deathbed. It was All Hallows Eve, the day when we let air out suppressed pagan impulses, and the night when spirits stretched their translucent bones for revelric dance. I was a young man, full of health and vigour, and from that physical vim proceeded a stalwart mental health that was as much the envy of the pessimistic hypochondriac as was my vast fortune. From the publishing industry to the avaricious miser, although I came from landed gentry, I did not use nary a sterling in my inheritance to build my empire, so I could look at myself proudly in the mirror and proclaim myself a self-made man. Here, telegrammatoned to avoid any legal action from his estate. Perhaps you may say that such a worry is unfounded, as I rot locked away in a sanitarium that my own fortune funded and paid for. To this I say, tosh. No one is ever safe from the infernal creature known as a solicitor. There is no beast upon the face of this earth as hideous or as fatal as a lawyer. I was drawn to the publishing field due to my own youthful love of crafting stories. By the time I was knees height, I had written a bevy of stories, strange and awful. I was a melancholic boy, unhappy unless I was exploring the source of my disquietude. In college, I went overseas to the institution of my dreams, in the fog-bogged town of Arkham, which was a slice of Old Haven, attending the nascent Miskatonic University, back when it was still a proper college. There, while my fellows sought out drink and song to relieve themselves of the pressures of the day, I spent my nights spilling over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. My love of the esoteric and arcane was fueled by its oak-lined library, particularly the sealed section of forbidden tomes, which unsealed themselves against my family's affluence. When I was expelled from the college, for reasons that I will not disclose here, as they would colour you against me, I extracted a single tome that I brought with me back to North England, to my family's manor in Old Haven, the most unholiest of unholies, the book by the mad Arab, his masterpiece bound in human flesh, the Naturom Demento, better known as the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the Book of the Dead. It was this, my treasure of a decade's time, that I was poring over in my private office on London's Cecil Court on the evening in question. Its horrid depictions of sacrifice and demonic entities were fresh in my mind as I lay my head down without a second thought, as I was made of hardy, indestructible stuff. Or so I had deluded myself into believing. Please, dear reader, steel yourself, for what you are about to lay your eyes upon, it may consume you as certainly as did the deadite that devoured Al-Azred's soul. Stave 1. A Dream of a Dreamer. The entity spoke to me from the abyss, stirring me from what I believed was a dream, but I was stirred into a greater dream that was the realest I had ever experienced. I could smell in this dream, which was unheard of in any of the psychic or psychological circles I frequented. What entered my nose was as awful as it was ancient. Pungent decay that spoke of eons of uncounted rot. An odour of rotting flesh, the iron tang of blood, turned to dust. The smell alone spiked my own blood with fear's agent, adrenaline. My heart, at a gallop, pulled into a full trot when green lightning streaked across the heavens, and for a horrible moment, forever imprinted on my memory, the first fatal blow of my sanity. I laid eyes upon the city I knew from my academic studies to have been long lost to time. Pronounced from the throat, in the manner of a dying goat, its spires hurt the mind in their casual disregard for geometry, spiking in vertiginous directions. that caused physical pain to the rational centers of my brain. The buildings varied, multitudinous and alien in their purpose and design, clung to the spires, spreading as far as the eye could see, up to the very dark, ichorous waters that would one day claim the city, when the cold South Atlantic swallowed it up forever. What was most awful were the vast, flat fields, just slanted enough to spike disease into those who walked upon it, which were dedicated to veneration of the patron of this city, the dread priest who had ruled there as a living god. The signs of this worship were still evident, tiered temples caked with green blood, the blood of whatever awful creature had peopled this endless city, spilling out their life's essence to keep their god alive. I mouthed the mantra that must have passed through the victims' mouths, now for my own sake. The entity spoke again, from the freshly descended darkness, his basso profundo resounding in my chest. Welcome to my dream. I thank a more beneficial Lord that I had my eyes affixed to the dread priest's city in that brief flicker flash of lightning, rather than onto his visage, for I knew that if I had seen Cthulhu with my own eyes, I would have been driven utterly mad. I would have been destroyed of mind, as surely as Moses would have been destroyed of body had he beheld his Maker in his awesome totality. Even those 3 seconds of sight upon his long erased city was too much for my mind to bear. How anyone could abide in that city and not succumb to monstrosity. Forgive me, as it is time for my medicine. Now, more relaxed, I can continue with my cerebration. That no citizen of that vile metropolis did avoid a slide into the monstrous, as evidenced by the vast complex of cigarettes, all caked in sacrifice. The dead priest spoke again from his perfected darkness. The elder god began. Your faith has earned you this move. I tried to respond, but realized I could not hear my own voice over the din of the Ancient One's breathing. The dreamer intoned. You do not have much I listened to the god. I could tell that he was very close to me. I could feel the wind from his tentacular movement, and the smell of the rotting dead from his breath. He was the scent of this city, for he and his city were one. Cthulhu laughed at my thoughts. I was not curious as to why, for in my studies I had uncovered that the elder gods were sensitive to psychic emanations and could read my mind. Listen, seeker. The dreamer continued. You'll be visited on this evening when the liminal boundary between realms is the weakest, by 3 agents, servants of gods, both outer and deep. The first kneels to my own ancestor, the second serves my friend,
and the last worships my sworn enemy.
I sought to close my eye, in thought, to cogitate upon his utterance, but in that total darkness, and in my unseated state, I could not tell if my eyes were cinching shut or open wide.
It is the eye in your brain that is seeing.
Cthulhu addressed me.
The pine cone rarely used by your kind.
His words calmed me, despite his terrible voice, which was worse than what I could have ever fancied in my darkest of prose.
3 agents, 3 servants.
Cthulhu repeated. I spoke, but my ears were deadened, and I do not know if I produced anything other than a garbled groan. I dizzied at the thought that I had produced a sound that approximated the language of his long-dead people.
Quiet your dithering,
The dreamer boomed.
and listen well to this final warning.
I fell silent within my silence and listened.
These 3 agents have been drawn to you this very evening by your piercing of the veil and by your possession of my book, and they are coming to kill you.
I felt a mighty wind rock me off my feet from his impossibly large wings, sending me hurling off of the cliff I had not known I was standing on, toward the dream's death. Stave to, wide as the gate. Peter, a soft voice spoke from just beyond my candlelight. I slammed my head into the cabinet above my desk, upon which I had fallen into my unintentional slumber, started as I was from my horrible dream or vision. It was so real. The smell of death and decay was still in my nostrils. I can still, all these years later, taste the iron and sulfur if I close my eyes and concentrate. I tried to rub away the pain and brought back a hand stained by my blood. Oh no, my intruder said, hurrying over to me. I braced up, afraid that this was the promised first attack of 3, but the rational seat of my center delivered to me, by scent and sound, perfume and gait, the identity of my assailant. It was Lucinda Lestrange, my tenant, a fortune-teller by occupation, who occupied the ground floor storefront beneath my office. She applied a portion of her headdress to my wound, ruining it in the act of staunching the flow. I was touched by this act, as I knew her costumes were costly. It was a superficial wound, and so did not seep for long. I assured her she was not the cause of my consternation, but rather the otherworldly dream that I had only then awoken from. I will reimburse you for your ruined coverings, I promised. You know I am good for it. She laughed and then said, You failed to show for your yearly tarot readings on this most suspicious of nights, All Hallows Eve. I'm quite sorry, Luz. I forgot myself in a lost book of mine. I apologize. I must have dozed off without realizing it. I saw it for the time, and saw that it was 11:11, less than a revolution's time from the witching hour. Lucinda was a long-standing tenant, an old friend. If she was my murderer, then I was quite undone. There is time now, Lucinda said, also looking at my clock, but I thought of the omen, still fresh in my mind. It was all too real to discount, and so I shook my head. It must await until All Saints' Day this year. I could stand for a more divine reading. I believe I have feasted to my fill of the strange and supernatural. A perfect nightmare, I intoned. The dream was that bad? Lucinda asked with a tender hand on my shoulder. A perfect nightmare, I intoned. In fact, it was so awful that I pray you retire for the evening and shut up shop. I promise I will pay thrice your rate for a fresh morning reading, but on the condition that you retire forthwith, my friend. I prayed she would assent without further question. I wished to preserve her from the heralded danger, in the eventuality that what I had experienced was not an occult-fueled fever dream, but an accurate indicator of the imperiled state of my life, without unnecessarily scaring her or causing her concern for my worry. In fact, I was quite certain she would insist on staying with me the night, had I indicated to her that my life was in potential jeopardy, and I could not bear the thought of bringing harm to such a charming woman. I would not have been able to live with myself. She studied me in the candlelight, her eyes ever in flux from blue to green in the flickering luminosity. I could see in her eyes that she had caught the scent of something afoot, but she must have seen in my eyes a quiet imploration and an inductive in reference worthy of Baker Street's most famous fictional occupant. She nodded in agreement. Yes, I will shut up shop for the evening. London sleeps everywhere but its East End. To there I will return, and howl at the moon until I am ready to catch some unintentional slumber. She winked at me, as a coda to her jest. Relieved, I patted her hand and wished her a happy return. I knew better than to offer to accompany her. Over the years, she had asserted her ability to move about the city without worry for villainous entanglement, and would have soured at my attempt to see her home. And I, as a landed gentry, was not the most welcome interloper to London's rougher side. I heard the jangle of keys below, preceded by the softest wisp of shuttering curtain and the heavier slam of her front door. I listened until the clicks of her heels on the cobblestone faded into the night. I watched her vanish into the heavy, almost preternaturally saturated fog. I thought you would never leave. A raspy voice spoke from behind me, and I heard the sharp exhalation of air that killed my candle's flame. And then it was only the moon's fog-dimmed, blind eye that provided me with its imperfect light. I whirled around, my back pressing into the window through which I saw off Miss Lestrange. The glass was cold against my dress shirt, as cold as the chill that seized my heart at the sounding of the intruder's voice. The old one did not lie. My life was in terrible jeopardy, a triple jeopardy. Peter Genadius. The intruder spoke flatly. You have something my master covets to lay his great eyes upon. I gazed into the darkness to lock onto this unwelcome guest, but he or she seemed as insubstantial as a ghost. In that imperfect darkness, I caught a glimpse of glasses, betrayed by a glint of moonlight. A bookworm like myself, with an androgynous voice I did not know. Who do you serve? I asked the stranger, to purchase myself time, as I snaked my hand through the darkness to locate my cane. My uncle had been fodder for Crimea, and it was his cane that I sought, which had seen me through my own convalescence, after sustaining my own war wound against the Boers in vain. I serve the one who sees all knowledge but no love, the great eye, ensorceler of Hermes, the thrice great, in times turned to dust, known by his Tamrielic name of Hermaeus the Timeless, feared Daedric Prince, the dead priest's own grandfather. I remembered Cthulhu's words, that the first visitor would be an agent of his ancestor. The intruder rasped. That raspy voice was pushed to its full limits in naming their master, as it would to the throats of any who speak of him. The dread gate, I said, continuing to search for the cane. The intruder sighed. It'll be such a pity to kill a man as learned as you. Likewise, I countered. My searching hand still came up with nothing. Looking for this? I heard the telltale thud of ebony upon mahogany. My cane, and I was back in the dark continent, rushing toward my opponent. Disarmed as I was, I caught my murderer off guard, slamming into a frail frame that could have belonged to either sex, lifting them off of the ground, and slamming my payload through my old partner's desk, the long-dead Yakov. I retrieved my cane from their stunned frame and lost myself. Another crack was delivered to the tenebrous framework of my sanity, as my shadow self took hold, and I brought down my cane repeatedly, until it produced cracks of its own into my assailant's skull, and shortly what was beneath my cane could no longer be, in good conscience, referred to as a face. Doubts flooded my mind. A murderer I've become, even if in defense of my life. I was sickened to sanity's brink. What if I had been in error? What if it had been some labyrinthine masquerade, and I murdered an innocent, sent here by someone with enough knowledge of my proclivities to manipulate me to murder? I had only taken life as a soldier. I was not prepared to cross that Rubicon as a civilian. I heard a cackling from outside the window. I went over to look, and my mind caved in even further. The moon had become a great eye, its craters conjoining with one large pupil, and the colour and consistency of a poached egg. Yog Sothoth looked down at me, its eye somehow smiling. I failed a sanity check. Something deep inside me fractured, like a greening bone. I howled at the cyclopean moon until I collapsed under its pale, hideous light. Peter. The smell of bergamot oil and cured leaves soaked in boiled water aroused me back to my consciousness. My candle was lit again, and I had no recollection of relighting my candle, or making any tea. My sanity had been so shattered, I had done both in the grasp of lunacy. I had lost my mind before. I had spent time in a sanitarium before Old Haven's asylum became my forever home. I was worried that I was lost in the dark woods of a permanent psychosis, bereft of any Virgilian guide to coax me out of the circles of my private hell. I felt like I had sunk under water. The world had taken on a blue, sorrowful hue. I drank the tea fit for an earl, unsettled between order and chaos. Despite it being a breakfast tea, I had need of the caffeine to ready myself for my next attacker. I was now a firm believer in the dead priest's dark portents. Who would come next? The world began to undulate, as if I had sunk into the South Atlantic, where Cthulhu's hideous city waited with him, to awaken and destroy the known universe. May the dreamer stay dreaming. I drank, reciting the elder prayer, turned toast. The world shifted again like waves. Here's to me, sip. Who's like me, sip. Damn few, sip. And they're all dead. I drained the teacup. It slipped from my fingers, which had become numb and useless like vestigial flippers. It stopped in midair before hitting the floor and began floating. As soon was I. Was there something in the tea? I shook my head clear. There was the broken teacup on the ground. There were my feet on the floor. There were my hands, normal and grasping. And there was the hideous, half-man, half-fish, brandishing a knife from out of a submariner's nightmare. I mustered the wherewithal to bring up my hands to catch the hilt of the knife before it buried itself into my eye socket. The Fishman hissed, his filed, pointed teeth clicking in the air inches from my face, seeking to make a meal of my aquiline nose And so did a bird do battle with his prey. We slammed about the office, shattering lamps and rendering priceless vellum of esoteric scrolls. This opponent was not the academic my previous visitor was, and seemed to have a sea dweller's lack of concern for literature. I heard tell, during my time in Arkham, of a town hidden in the fog of the Massachusetts shore, a hamlet where visitors did not leave to tell the tale. It was called Innsmouth, the name of an awe-inspiring curse on the lips of my fellows. I remember chiding them, laughing that Arkham should have an asylum for tellers of such tall tales. The tall tale, taller than me by a head, casting over me his shadow in the sea-blue light of the moon, refreshing his efforts to plunge his ancient, spiral dagger into my heart. The dagger itself drained my sanity, its spiraling blade a miniature of some awful spirals of Relaya. We knocked into my favoured desk by the window, which held the dead priest's dead book. It fell to the ground, its dead eye opened, spinning around and looking at us. Both I and the Fishman screamed, but I, having already taken such shots to my sanity as to render it momentarily anti-fragile, seized my opponent's surprise to twist the dagger around and plunge it into his stomach. I pulled the knife upward towards his heart, like a samurai's second, aiding in the grim seppuku. I gutted him like a fish. The man fell to his knees, his gills flapping rhythmically in and out. I felt sorrow for taking this pathetic creature's life. I sobbed as the light dimmed from his eyes.
Father Dagon, Mother Hydra, carry me home.
My enemy, who in another life could have been my friend, sighed, his eyes fixed on the sky outside, which had turned deep blue, clouds becoming waves. I felt like I was drowning. I clutched at my throat and succumbed to darkness once again. Stave 4. The King in Yellow.
Peter.
The madman giggled in my face, his horrible yellow eyes piercing into mine. I woke with a scream. Was it all a dream? The corpses on my floor answered my self-posed question. London's cold, heavy fog clung to the windows, taking on a sulphuric hue. Cowardice clawed its way up my spine. I wanted to run out into the night, away from the final threat that the priest portended, but fear kept me rooted to that spot. My eyes perchanced upon a framed painting on my office wall, a rendering of the fabled, otherworldly city of Carcosa. The carcasses on the floor stared at the painting as well, their dead eyes eternally locked on its fog-breathed Lake Harley. It was painted by an American detective friend of mine, gripped in a vision. He was a true detective, who had paid the ultimate price, his precious sanity. He was a tenant of mine as well, in Old Haven's asylum. Had I but known then that I would join him there one day. I don't know if there was anything I could have done differently. From the fog of the painting rose a glow, first faint and indecipherable from the artistic mist, but then the glow took on the shape of eyes, horrible lupine eyes, glowing orange in the red dusk of the alien city of Carcosa. But as it drew closer, its yellow dominated the negative space of the painting, until the face became unproportionately large against the surrounding scenery. Pyrite eyes stared at me from the painting, as if a horrid reflection of my own face. I opened my mouth to scream, but a lupine hand shot out of the painting and clawed for my lips. I moved back from the swiping, jaundiced nails. The final agent emerged fully from the painting and hurled into me with Haster's haste, and we broke through my cooled office window. We landed under the narrow ledge outside the window with a woof and locked together in a fatal dance, grappling our ways up to the roof. Slats slid down from under my foot as I wrestled with the yellow-eyed demon. We battled beneath the moon that had aged to the colour of an old book, both of us howling and clawing at each other in our lunacy. But then my attacker stopped. He looked up at the moon, which had become a hideous yellow eye.
My master says it's time for the climax.
The creature spoke through his muzzled mouth. I, gasping for breath, could only guess at his meaning, but I did not have to wait long. With a wide grin, he leapt off of the building, impaling himself through the heart like a suiciding vampire. On a spire of the black, wrought iron fence that surrounded my office building's property, he grinned widely, his yellow teeth gleaming under the yellow moon, as he coughed up his life's fluid, and then was no more. I howled beneath the moon as the clock struck 12. I looked up to see a witch soaring through the air on a broomstick at Samhain's coda, and then fell asleep. Stave 5. The Crawling Chaos.
Dreamer, awaken.
I awoke in the chill morning of All Saints' Day, shivering on the roof in my dew-soaked office wear. My teeth chattered audibly. I had never been so relieved to have the sun's rays pierce my sight. Such a welcome change from the chameleonic moon and the spectral visitors of the night. I looked down at my iron fence to see a scarecrow pierced upon it, gingerly climbing down to my office window, which was very much broken. I climbed past the broken glass as if in a dream to find a gutted haddock on my office floor. Nearby on my broken mahogany table was my old mannequin with its head staved in. I picked up the Necronomicon from the floor and set it reverently back onto my desk. It had all just been a dream. The scarecrow extracted himself from the fence and climbed up to put its dead arm on my shoulder in stern disagreement with my prognosis. The fish croaked at me to open mine eye, an eye as dead and empty as the eye on the flesh-bound book, emerged from the middle of the mannequin's head and looked at me, blinking questionably. It was not a dream. Nyarlathotep promised me. Her new head wrap was suited for a pharaoh. Her eyes flashed from green to blinded white, to blue, to yellow, and then briefly to red. I didn't want to scream. I had the compulsion to. I giggled instead. Nyarlathotep giggled with me. It was really, truly, quite a hoot. I had finally, completely, utterly lost my mind, and it felt like freedom. Are you ready for your reading? Nyarlathotep asked me. Of course I am. I giggled some more, as I began to bleed from my eyes, for I finally could see. She laid out 6 cards, 5 at the vertices that comprised an upright elder sign, and 1 at its centre. We flipped the cards over together. There were no tarot cards I had ever seen, but a composite of the dreamer whose dream we were within, a matrix from which an escape was impossible. No pills or other iatrogenic magic would permit any egress. At the crown were his red eyes, at either extremity his wings, at the bottom of the star his taloned feet, and at the centre we, hands enjoined, flipped the final card. I breathed in sharply in anticipation of what I would behold. It was a normal tarot reading. A major arcanum X, the Wheel of Fortune. Only within its centre was a great eye promising deliverance. A divine promise, Nyarlathotep affirmed, just as you asked for. The 4 writers floated about the wheel, as beastly Zephyrs, while the devil in his pride crushed himself beneath the nadir of the fiery wheel that is forever in motion. What a beautiful reading, I sighed, wiping my tears of blood away. It gives me hope. This is my gift to you. Thank you. I cried more streams of scarlet. Lucinda smiled, then put up a hand and said, "Now prepare yourself, Peter." Luz, with her other hand, held up a mirror to my face. I saw Cthulhu in his priestly vestments, staring back at me. I reached a hand upwards for my mouth, and Cthulhu's arm matched mine. The trajectory ended prematurely as my hand met with horrid, moist tentacles. I reached my other hand forward for the mirror, meeting Cthulhu's rising hand, and stretched out my fingers and touched a cold and unyielding surface of polished glass. Beholding him, beholding us, had robbed me of my last unit of silent lucidity, as I had feared. But such fear could no longer find an anchor in my heart, for my heart was full of hope. Epilog. My name is Peter Gennadius, an agent of Nyarlathotep. I swear by my loved ones, living and dead, that what I recounted herein is true. I am of unsound mind, but of soundest heart and soul. What I proclaim is of the heart. I sing the spirit electric. The elder gods, those I love, embrace me, and I embrace them. A song of myself for you, dear friend. I never in all these years sought the prose to describe Lord Cthulhu's face in any great detail beyond the broad strokes that have leaked out in his mythos. I refuse to do so here, for even to read about a second-hand, accurate account of the dread priest's image would upend your balance of mind, my dear reader. Take heart that I no longer share his face, but it was one final illusion, one designed by a loving hand to loose the last bond of sanity that was tethering me to this life of worry, and so herein I conclude my carol, in my asylum sanctorum with comparative frivolities. My only visitor, my quasi-constant companion, Lucinda Lestrange. I do not know how she gains ingress into my padded room. I do not care. The elder signs that I have painted on the walls over the years in my blood keep out all the agents and servants that seek me harm, but invite my blessed ally within, to be framed in the galaxial glory I bled for her. The nice men in the white coats don't try to wipe my protective galaxy of stars off the wall anymore, because no one can stand my inhuman shrieking. They cannot fathom such a voice coming from a human, and it pleases me. It is evidence of things unseen. They have never beheld the songs of the elder gods, with which to emulate such a dreadful scream. I hope I have not upset you too terribly. Dear reader, dear friends, I hope you can bear all of the awful things I have to say. I hope I have helped you weather the tempest of my madness, stealing you with my prologue. What is past is prologue. As the great bard wrote, and like his monster, whenever I wake, I cry to dream again. And per his magician, we are such stuff as dreams are made on. Our little life is rounded with the sleep. My deepest hope is that you arise from my tale more inspired by the hope I have purchased for my heart at the minuscule cost of my mind. Hope there now springs eternal, like living water from a bottomless well. Even the elder gods must, in the end, prostrate their tendrils towards the pleroma, and there, in that gold of heaven, is the holy source of my hope, faith and love, my Luz, my light, Selah, Amen, Cthulhu Fatani. I think that's a fitting place to end the video there. Thank you so much for this beautiful Lovecraftian piece. And I hope that if you're still awake listening, that you appreciated the work that went into this writing as much as I did. Thank you to everyone else that sent in stories. And if you have such a tale of dark, strange, and mysterious things that you would like to be read on this channel, then feel free